Today is Wednesday, June 29th, 2011. I'm Matthew T.G.
He's Steve Stanley, and I'm Tony Casey. Welcome to the Technology Show, a weekly podcast featuring technology, theology, and everything in between. The world's only user-antagonistic podcast. This is episode 114. Steve, are you there? Steve is not there.
I wasn't. I tried to say my name, but it probably didn't come through. I lost you guys. I didn't hear him say who he was, but I am Steve Stanley, the only.
Listen,
certified Steve Stanley.
Yeah, I said you were Steve Stanley, so
okay, thank you.
Yeah, it worked out.
Two or three witnesses, I guess we got covered.
So Heath is not with us again this week. He's off preaching at another youth camp on the Wisconsin district. And I saw on one of his posts, I think it was on Monday, he had to put his hoodie on because it was cold up there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wish.
Yeah. All right. Well, we want to welcome to the show today Chris Conrad. Chris Conrad grew up in San Diego, California, where he attended the Skyline Wesleyan Church under the leadership of Orville Butcher and John Maxwell. In 1988, Chris served as an assistant pastor of a one-year-old church plant in Tucson, Arizona. In 1993, Chris and his wife Mary, along with a launch team of 13 adults, planted Countryside Community Church in South Dakota. The church grew in 6 years to an average attendance of 360, and in 2007-2008, the church averaged 917. In 2000, Chris and Mary moved to Madison, Wisconsin, where they planted Lakeshore Community Church in January 2006. After these three church planting experiences, Chris became the director of church planter development for the Wesleyan Church. Also in 2006, Chris and Mary adopted two beautiful girls from the Ukraine, Julia and Natalia. In 2007, Chris's first book, 5 Things Anyone Can Do to Introduce Others to Jesus, was published. And in 2009, his DVD teaching series on lifestyle evangelism entitled The Perfect Blend was released. Chris's latest book, Your Church Can Win, was based on a study of the most successful churches in his denomination and is filled with suggestions and working strategies for churches to maximize their kingdom impact. Chris, good morning. Thank you for coming on the show.
It's an incredible privilege for me to be here. Thanks so much for having me this morning.
Okay, now we have to pick on you because when we first brought you in on our video Skype here, we recognized that you have 3 books on your shelf, and all 3 of those books are probably yours, right? The ones that you wrote.
No doubt. And I tell you, the deal is that I have as many books on my shelf as I can read, and they're either my books or they are Cat in the Hat books, and they're about the apex of what I can read. The truth of the matter is, I'm in the process of moving offices, so we've shelved all the books at this point. So, but some would argue that would reflect my IQ right there. Is what that would reflect. So there you go.
Yeah. Well, what we said in the pre-show is that Chris has 3 books, and they're all 3 that he authored, and he autographed all 3 for himself. All right, Chris. Well, let's jump in here. One of the things that intrigues me is this study that you did of churches in the Wesleyan Church, successful churches. I think the first place to start here is, in your own mind, what qualified a Wesleyan church to be a successful Wesleyan church?
Well, what I did was very simple, actually. I just went to the people that crunched the numbers at our denominational headquarters, and I said, give me a list of the churches that grew by 20% or more this last year. And I did that for a couple years in a row, and then I started looking for patterns. Where are the churches that had a trend where I could see that things were really happening? And I'll be really honest with you. There, obviously, if you grew from 20 to 24, then hey, that's a 20% growth.
Yeah.
And so, I was looking for where could I see, some of our rural churches, certainly. As a matter of fact, we had some of our successful churches come out of these rural experiences where perhaps the entire community is only a few hundred people, but the church grew by 75 or 80. So those are the kinds of things I was looking for, is the trends of churches that were growing by 20% or more over a couple-year period.
And so what were some of the takeaways from that whole experience?
One of the things that I found really fascinating is I then created a survey of those churches and sent it out to those leaders and then asked them to respond back to us. One of the things that I found fascinating was that they all were talking about trying to win people to Christ. They were all focused on how do we get people into a relationship with Jesus? How do we do that successfully? How is it that people are moving along their spiritual journey? Are we opening up places for people to investigate Christianity, both inside and outside the church? Certainly missional kinds of things were talked about a lot concerning people getting out in the community. But one of the things that I found fascinating, I think, as we studied that was the fact that many of these churches had been doing this kind of thing for 3 or 4 or 5 years, and were finally beginning to get their traction. Jim Collins talks a lot about the flywheel and just getting the flywheel going in the right direction for a long enough period of time. And I think what happens is that too many churches try something for a year or two, and then they give up on it, and they say, that just doesn't work for us. When instead what I found among these churches that grew by 20% or more over a couple of year period is that they had actually been doing the same thing for 4 or 5 years strategically with a mission, with a focus, and we'll talk perhaps about focus again here in just a minute. But they've been doing those things for 4 or 5 years, and finally the momentum kicked in, and that's really what helped them to be successful in reaching people for Christ and then growing their church as a whole.
I wonder, Chris, how much also focuses in or depends upon a leader. So you talk about churches that were doing something for 3 to 5 years before they got the momentum. I've often said that it took me 8 or 9 years in ministry before I got my feet under me to where there was this transition from what I call a chaplain mentality of ministry to an outreach mentality of ministry. I wonder, did you see any of that in terms of leadership issues and an understanding of what the church is trying to do?
Yeah, great question, and a great question. Yeah, I would certainly say that as I studied that, one of the things, again, I came out of, as you mentioned in your introduction, I came out of Skyline. When I was 15 years old, John Maxwell came to be our senior pastor, and when John came, soon after that, he started his mantra. Probably, 1982 or something. Everything rises and falls on leadership.
Yeah.
He came to Skyline in 1980, but by 1981, 82, he'd zeroed in on that. Everything rises and falls on leadership. And I got to tell you personally, there was a time period when I just kind of said, I'm not so sure that's true, because I wanted to spiritualize things. I wanted to say that, really it's up to the Lord. But I got to tell you, as I've done this study, and looked at other successful ministries across the landscape of evangelical Christianity, I've kind of come to the conclusion that probably most things rise or fall on Spirit-anointed leadership. So what I'm saying is, back to your question, absolutely. I think it comes back to the leader driving it and giving it focus. If I can, let me just talk for a second about that word focus.
Sure.
Marcus Buckingham really, he helped me probably 6 years ago with the idea of so much of leadership comes down to clarity. Is it clear? Are we making our point clear? I think what happens is for so many pastors is they run off to this seminar or they read this book and they get inspired by this event or again, that book or that teaching or that YouTube or that thing. And so you watch their ministries and they're just zigzagging all over the place. And what Marcus Buckingham talks about is we've got to be clear as far as our focus and what we're talking about. Friend, let me give one little silly example that Marcus talks about. And that is, he talks about when a new mayor came into being there in New York City. And he said, what happened is that this guy made a declaration that all taxi cab drivers were going to have to wear a collared shirt because so many people come to New York City from around the world, and he just thought that a collared shirt made a statement. So all taxi cab drivers had to wear collared shirts. Now, Marcus Buckingham says, now, is that the right decision? And then he goes on and says, I don't know if it's right or not, but it's clear. And I think so often what happens is that ministries are going 15 different directions and there's not clarity. And what we found in this study of 20% churches that were growing by 20% is that they were clear. They're crystal clear about this is what we're trying to do. Craig Rochelle in his book, It, talks a lot about that you've got to focus in on the one or two things that you do well, get great clarity about that, and then give yourself to that.
Don't you think, though, that there's pressure at the local church level, and I call it the super Walmart mentality? And so if I'm pastoring Church B in this community where Church A is 8 miles down the road, it's running 3,000, and they seem to be able to offer everything for every age group, I automatically feel the pressure as I'm pastoring this church of 60 to try to meet that.
Yeah, you know what's funny is that in our second church plant, we planted a church. We planted this church a mile away from a church that was running 3,000, and and a great evangelical church, and a mile away on the other direction, in the other direction, from a church that was running 2,500. And I'm thinking, I look back at that and say, what in the world was I thinking? Why did I do that? Right smack in the middle. But I think in that particular case, then, what that church of 60, to use your example, has to do is it has to decide, what is it that we do well? Yeah. You're absolutely right. And I think that the pressure is to say, we've got to have a full-fledged youth group. We've got to have a men's ministry. We've got to have a women's ministry. We've got to have everything that the church down the street has. When in reality, I think what you have to do is you have to play to your strengths. What is it that this church of 60 can do really, really well? And let me give you a small example of that. You can take this or leave it. But for instance, I found in our first church plant that I couldn't throw a hammer in our congregation without hitting a contractor. What I mean by that is we had like 9 full-time contractors in our first church plant that all had crews. Well, man, if I had that to do over again, certainly something that I would have done if I had it to do over again is I would have done something like, Greatest Home Improvement or something like that, Home Makeover or something like that, where we could have served the community in that way. And try to make a difference in that way. So what I find is that every church, even churches of 60, tend to have some certain things in their DNA that they're naturally good at. Well, how can I maximize what we're naturally good at and serve the community with that and do it, quite frankly, perhaps in a way that's better than the church of 3,000 can do it, and just do it to the best of our ability? No, I'm not going to have a full-fledged ministry. I'm not going to have the best youth group in town, probably. I'm not going to have all that, but that's okay. What can I do well that can serve our community well and bring people into a relationship with Jesus Christ?
Yeah. You talk about focus. You talk about some patterns that you saw. Were there any other takeaways from this study that really stick out to you?
Well, I think the last one that I would just mention here is the fact that that I think at the end of the day, what it really takes is a love for people who are far from Jesus Christ. You mentioned it earlier in the fact that I think so many pastors, as you said, even in your own experience, I think that for you, it took you, 8 or 9 years just to get your feet under you and say, wow, you know what? I could spend a lot of time and spend a lot of energy just keeping all the people in this church happy, or I can do my best to help change the DNA of our church and say, you know what? We've got to get to the point where Jesus was, where Jesus continually, in my opinion, his one-word mission, or his one-sentence mission statement was, I came to seek, and the Son of Man came to seek and to save those who are lost. Yeah. Luke 19:10. I just think we got to get that in our mind and in our hearts. And those churches that grew by 20% realized that they were going to have to get their evangelism feet under them and start moving in that direction. But that came from their own hearts and their own spirits, allowing God to break their own personal hearts for that afresh and anew.
Sure. I'm going to ask you to be a little bit vulnerable here, Chris. In your own, now this is your own personal experience of church planting. Just reflecting on that, what would you say are some of the things that you look back on and say, yeah, you know what, we got that right? And then conversely, things that you look back on and say, man, if I had it to do over again, I would do this particular thing totally different.
Well, and I appreciate the question. I'm happy to be vulnerable with you. And two things immediately come to mind. And I can think of 57 things that we probably didn't do so well. Let me tell you one thing that we did well and one thing that we just botched entirely. Okay. In our first church plant, I was so pleased, and the Lord helped us so well, that we had a guy come in who was doing his PhD study on church plants. And he came in and he just did a study on our church plant. And one of the things he found is he came back and he reported back to me and he said, here's what I found. 95% of everyone that I interviewed was able to articulate your one-sentence mission statement as a church. And so we were again, it's that vision, it's that focus. And I was so pleased with that I think that's what helped that church to grow. And now, we were privileged to plant that church in 1993. The church is just about 20 years old now, 18 years old, and it's averaging well over 1,000 now. And yet I think if you were to ask 80% of the leaders, 90% of the leaders of that church still today, they'd be able to articulate that vision statement because it became part of the DNA of that. And it was continually that lost people matter to God. And so as a result of that, that's one thing that I think at the end of the day that I felt like when I left that place, I felt good that the focus was there towards lost people. And the methods will change. How we do things will totally change every year probably. But our DNA as far as why we're here is the same. Now, let me tell you something bogus that I did. We moved, as you mentioned, we moved from Spearfish, South Dakota to Madison, Wisconsin. Now, again, as you mentioned, I'm born and raised in San Diego. I fit more culturally probably with Madison seemingly than I would with Spearfish, South Dakota. I don't hunt. I don't fish. Sorry about that. It's just not part of my DNA. I love hunters. I love fishermen. It's just not part of who I am. And so anyway, so I would fit more in Madison, Wisconsin. But here's what I didn't do. I didn't, and I wish the book would have been out then. I'm not sure if it would have changed it, but my friend Ed Stetzer's book, Breaking the Missional Code, wasn't out yet. And you know what I didn't do is I didn't break the missional code of Madison. I didn't really understand what Madison was like. I mean, I heard all kinds of people saying that it was the most liberal city in the Midwest, and we had a lesbian couple that lived 2 houses down from us. And yes, the gay and lesbian culture is very strong in Madison. And yes, it was the very first university of all universities in the country that allowed beer to be sold on campus way back in the day. Yeah. So there are all kinds of things that should have awakened me to the fact that I was not in, quote unquote, if I can use this term, not in Kansas anymore, Toto. I mean, right. Quite frankly, people are shocked when I say this, but Madison is a much more liberal town than San Diego ever dreamed of being. And I just didn't do the study of what makes the people in this town tick. Yeah. And so what we did, quite frankly, is we just planted the church that we had just left. We planted that exact same church in Madison, Wisconsin, and we just assumed it would grow. And it didn't. That church never averaged more than 100 people, even though I was in a much larger setting, even though I had more talent, I had more money, I had more everything in Madison, except for an understanding of the Madison culture. So again, we didn't do enough study. And because of that, man, it just faltered and failed. And, and here's the last thing I'll say about that. I prayed more. I fasted more. I had a closet in my house in Madison that I would fully get down on my hands and knees, down on my stomach, and I would just plead with God to help us reach the city. I was more spiritually in tune in Madison than I was even in South Dakota. But what I wasn't, looking back on it, was fully in tune with the culture enough to know how are we going to reach this culture.
Right. Wow.
Yeah, very good. As a side note, I was raised in Wisconsin, and I remember after I graduated attending one of the extension campuses in the Rock County, and I remember being shocked that on Wednesdays it was Tapper Day in the student lounge. You could buy beer 50 cents a cup, off the tap. Yep. It was like. So I remember for English, I wrote a paper why Tapper Day might be inconsistent with higher education.
I love it.
I had no idea how you were going to answer that question, but that is so great, Conrad, because again, being raised in Wisconsin, I've told people, you can't appreciate the atmosphere of especially Madison. If you're not from there, because we always think of Berkeley, California, or we think of these hotbeds of liberal thought politically and things of this nature. And I've always said that they have got nothing on Madison.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. And one thing that I'll finish that comment with this is. Again, my friend Ed Stetzer, he planted a church in Buffalo, New York, and one of the things he said is that he said, "I am an expert on Buffalo, New York." Now he's not being conceited when he says that, but he is. He knows more about Buffalo, New York than most people that live in Buffalo because he studied it, because he wanted to learn it. In the same way, wherever we go, whether they're liberal or conservative, wherever, if God calls us to a place, whether we're planting a church or we're going to establish a church, we've got to get to know that community really, really, really well, get to know the leaders of that community, get to know what makes that community tick so that we can minister effectively to that community. You watch how Jesus ministered, and he ministered very differently when he was talking to a non-Jewish audience than when he was talking to a Jewish audience. He was, and that's very subtle to us. We don't necessarily get that unless we really look at Scripture and really study where Jesus is in the different places when he's speaking in the Gospels. But if you do enough study, you can find his approach is very different. Paul's approach was vastly different depending on who he was talking to. And so how he talks at Mars Hill is vastly different than how he's talking when he's has an all-Jewish audience. And I don't think that we do enough to change our methodology based on where we are.
Yeah, it's interesting. For me, one of the kind of transformational moments in ministry here in the South was just going through demographic stuff and coming to the realization that in the Bible Belt here in South Carolina, in the county where I live, there are less than 3 out of every 10 people who are going to church on a Sunday morning. And so in the state of Wisconsin, there are more people going to church than there are in South Carolina. And just that little simple demographic changed my whole thinking to say, wait a minute, you know, I've been approaching this thing like Bible Belt, and everyone down here has this basic concept of the gospel, the Bible as authoritative, and we're going to live by it. The fact of the matter was they don't.
Yeah.
And so just grabbing a hold of some of that local stuff and the culture and understanding it, it clearly makes us more effective in ministry.
Yeah, I agree.
It seems to me like churches that are able to do that, boy, do they do well. I mean, what's the pastor that we've talked about before, even on this show, who says that, you know, the church should be the place where culture and community are coming together, are interacting, and it should happen there. Can't remember who. It'll come to me in a little bit, but we've talked about it.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about the theme over and over again. Yeah. I'm just curious, Chris. So, you know, you're a district superintendent. I serve as an assistant district superintendent for the Wesleyan Church here in South Carolina. I have a front row seat to our district superintendent's life. You guys are pulled in a million directions. And so for you, where does evangelism, church planting, where's that on the plate? And from your position, how does that all fit in?
That's a great question. I think, first of all, a lot of kudos, a lot of just compliments go to Mark Gorvet, who did an outstanding job here for 10 years, putting church planting on the radar here in this district and really getting, again, we talk about the flywheel, terminology. He really got the flywheel going. So now church planting is just an accepted reality here in our district. We're going to plant churches. And so that's a very high priority. But I got to tell you, for me, the ultimate desire is to see people come into a relationship with Jesus Christ. That's what we want to see happen. Right. Right now, church planting tends to be the most effective way to bring people to Christ. And so that's why we're into church planting. If in another year underwater basket weaving does it, then we're all going to figure out how to do underwater basket weaving more effectively. In other words, I think I'm not so much, married to this thing called church planting, even though I've done it a couple times, and I'm in a district that is somewhat known for that, and I celebrate that. I'm not married to church planting. I'm married to people coming into a relationship with Jesus Christ. That's what my main focus is, if you will, along those lines. And so, certainly we're trying to go forward with that. We're planning 2 more churches this year. We'd like to get to the point where we're planning 5 or 10 churches, as long as it's the most effective way to bring people to Jesus Christ. Last thing I'll say about that. Now let's go on record here. This is before our district conference is in another month, so we've got a month before this happens. And you're one of the first people to get this information. But we, as a district, we grew by 0.5%. That's just scary to me. We've got to be growing a lot more than that. And number 2, we saw about 1,900 people come to Christ, which is great. That's about 9% for us. But I really want to get that to more like 15 or 20%, to be brutally honest with you. We have to be focused on winning people to Jesus Christ, seeing that happen. And that, if we can do that and do that well, man, I will really celebrate that, seeing people come into a relationship with Jesus Christ. Now, the last thing I'll say about that is that we're trying to do some things. Like, for instance, we're going to start something here in the district called Strengths University. And the goal there is to help people understand their strengths. Again, the Marcus Buckingham, Gallup poll, the whole now discover your strengths, that whole thing. Our goal would be to help pastors and leaders understand their strengths and then operate in their strengths. I think one of the reasons why churches don't grow and why people don't come to Christ is because we have pastors that are spending way too much time out of their strength area because they feel like they can't spend time in their strength area.
Yeah. Well, and for years in the Wesleyan Church, I'll just speak for that, we have predominantly given one model of ministry, and I go back to the word chaplain. We have general practitioner, you do it all, and for some that is just a challenge where one might be a great speaker, but the other stuff doesn't work for them, or they're just really good with people, but the public speaking, and so it's finding the right seat on the bus. You know, we belong on the bus, but not necessarily in the driver's seat.
That's exactly right. And I would say, and this is something we're going to, again, try and implement right here in the West Michigan District. I would say, let's say, for instance, you just talked about a pastor who might be great at people skills, off the charts, and people are drawn to them, people love them, but they can't preach themselves out of a wet paper bag every Sunday, you know? And what I think needs to happen is that part of the problem is that they're trying to preach four Sundays a month, you know, on any given month, and they just can't do it well. They might be able to put one message, really good message together a month. So probably in that mix, you've got 2 or 3 other people in the congregation who could preach well. Well, who says that the pastor has to preach all 4 Sundays? I would contend, no, that pastor does not have to preach 48 Sundays a year. I would contend that what that pastor has to do is lead. And if they're leading in other ways, and people are coming to Christ, but they're successfully allowing other people to preach on Sunday mornings, men and women who have the gift of teaching and preaching, then I think the whole body is built up. That's exactly what Paul talks about, Ephesians 4, 1 Corinthians 12, Romans 12, 1 Peter 4. It's all about using those gifts to build up the body. So,
very good. Chris, just curious, in your own experience, how has evangelism changed over the last 20, 30 years?
Oh, obviously, I think for all of it, it's changed huge. But here's one little snapshot of it, and you probably have greater insights than I do. But I can remember growing up at Skyline again when John Maxwell came. I think it was on Thursday nights. They had this visitation night, so they would go knock on doors, you know, and just want to talk to people about Jesus. And so they did that. Interestingly enough, Lifeway Research did a study in the last 3 years where they said 63% of people would be open to someone knocking on their door and talking to them about Christianity, which I know, I find that mind-boggling to me because I haven't seen that same success rate. But that was the thing in the years I was growing up. I think today it's obviously got to be. Let me tell you the fallacy of that approach, although it's great. The fallacy of that approach was what happened is that 90% of the church said, well, I don't have the spiritual gift of evangelism, so I'm not going to go do that. That's what they did. When I think of evangelism today, when we talked about perfect blend, you know, those people who drink coffee, for instance, my wife drinks coffee and she has her perfect blend. She likes just so much half and half and just the right amount of sugar, and it's her perfect blend. Well, in the same way, I am convinced, as much as I'm sitting here, that our lives are supposed to be this perfect blend of our relationship with God and our relationship with other people. I'm convinced that God wants to give us divine appointments with a Starbucks barista, with a restaurant person, you know, a waiter or someone. Just He wants to give us continual divine appointments that we just are constantly flying by, because we're not realizing that our lives are supposed to be this perfect blend of our relationship with God and our relationship with other people. In other words, evangelism can take on a whole different mindset and heart in our lives if we'll just say, you know what, God, how do you want to use me today? And we might find ourselves in phenomenal conversations with people that are just divine appointments where we're helping people take the next step in their spiritual journey. And sometimes we'll get the privilege of winning that person to Christ. And sometimes we'll just help them take the next step in their spiritual journey. So I think it's about not the 10% who, quote unquote, have the spiritual gift of evangelism. I think it's about the 100% of evangelical Christians who are just living their lives open and available to the Holy Spirit to do whatever He wants to do through them in any given situation they find themselves in.
Yeah, last week we had Tom Clegg on. He's the author of the book Missing in America, and he tells this powerful story in that book where his church, they would go to Chicago, he would head it up, and it was cold evangelism is what he called it. Just go on the street, give someone a pamphlet and a tract, and in some cases when they were critical, Tom would have no inhibitions about saying to them, listen, if you know, you'll go to hell, you'll die. and if you don't accept Christ, and just this very cold, no relationship, and he is in a setting where a guy pulled a knife on him. He and his partner run for their lives, and it's a transformational moment for Tom because he feels convicted in that moment that I'm out here just trying to put notches on my gun belt. And so they go back to the van, they get the cooler, and they find these gentlemen again and find the guy who's chasing him with the knife. And the first thing they do is apologize. And then they begin to build relationship, give him a cold drink. It was really hot. A few years later, this guy eventually comes to Christ, and Tom said in a conversation, I asked him, why did you pull a knife on me? And he said, you guys would come in here, by you guys, he meant evangelical Christians, you'd pull out your tract, and you want me to read it. I can't read. And so, you're asking me to do something that I don't even understand. And, of course, there's no way you could know he didn't read outside of a relationship.
Right.
And so,
that's a powerful illustration. That really is.
Yeah, and that's what I hear you saying, that it's more about relationship now and belonging as opposed to starting out with some intellectual argument or something of that.
Yeah, and I think, again, what can happen, even in that example from Tom, who's a great guy, by the way. I'm a huge fan of Tom Clegg. But I think what can happen is that we can then settle in our minds, okay, you know what? I just did my evagelism thing. I just went to Chicago. I just did my thing. Yeah. Now I can go back into my life when, man, whether I'm going to Home Depot, whether I'm going to Walmart, whatever it is that I'm doing in any given moment, how does God want to use me in that moment? It's about, going back probably 12 years ago, something like that, this curriculum was put out by Willow Creek called Just an Ordinary Day with Jesus, or An Ordinary Day with Jesus. It was written by Ruth Haley Barton and John Ortberg. And just this concept of how does God want to work through me every minute of every day, and keeping that relationship with Jesus fresh all during the day. And, if we get to 3 o'clock and we haven't thought of Jesus in 3 hours, it's not time to beat ourselves up. It's just time to reconnect and say, okay, Jesus, wait. Let's reconnect again. Jesus, I love you. I'm so grateful for your grace. How do you want to use me now in this moment? So instead of compartmentalizing our lives has become, again, this perfect blend of our relationship with God and our relationship with other people. And we just try and be who he wants us to be in those situations, not out of guilt, but out of love and grace.
Oh, very good. Well, Chris, if our listeners would like to get some of your resources, where can they find your most recent book and the DVD that you've done?
Yeah, the best place to get those would be at the Wesleyan Publishing House, which is wesleyan.org/WPH.
All righty. And if our listeners want to find you online, are you out there anywhere?
Yeah, absolutely. Feel free to. I've hesitated at this point writing a blog because I don't think I have enough intelligent things to say. But
oh wow! Come on, look at all that stuff on your shelf back
just
there.
Pull one of those books down off the shelf, find a page, and just type that in.
And that somehow just kind of depicts it right there, doesn't it?
Cat in the Hat is still popular.
Yeah, exactly. But feel free if you go to westmichigandistrict.com. We can connect, and I'd love to connect with you. If there's any way that I can serve you, any way that I can help you, we want to do that. At the end of the day, we're just here to serve, and we want to do that any way we can.
Okay, and you're also on Facebook, I think.
I am, absolutely. Yeah, let's connect on Facebook. Would love to do that.
All righty. Well, Chris, thanks so much for taking time out to be with us today. Blessings on you there in West Michigan, and we just pray that the kingdom work goes forward there.
Well, it's been a huge privilege for me to be with you today. Thanks so much for what you're doing. And pastors, just want you to know I believe in you and excited about what it is that you're trying to do.
All right. We'll see you, Chris. All righty. Steve, are you still out there in computer land?
That sounds like a no to me.
Y'all notice that Steve's been pretty quiet. We've had a little trouble with his connection.
He's not even connected right now, so let me try to call him.
All right, let's see if we can get him back here. I mean, it'd be kind of a bummer for me alone to read all of the...
It would.
It
really would.
Welcome to the Techology Show.
Hey.
Well, thank you. Steve, we're going to try to move forward here.
Okay.
Lord willing, we'll keep you intact. I know that you were blipping in and out. Did you get to hear most of the conversation with Chris?
I got to hear quite a bit of it, and first of all, I just want to say he is a delightful person and personality.
Yeah.
You a lot of times get academic truth and even some practical truth, but it comes in packaging that you have to just swallow hard to get past. And with him, we get the whole thing.
He's the kind of guy that you just kind of get excited about the possibility, of working for or working under, just in that. In the way that he presents himself and does that. He's just,
Isn't it interesting, too? Didn't you love his insights about, having this successful church plant in the Dakotas and then going to Madison, Wisconsin, and how he didn't exegete the culture?
Mm-hmm.
I just thought that was very insightful.
Yeah. He's a rare combination. You would either say he's a grounded optimist or a practical optimist, and those two don't often come together.
Yeah, it was a delight having him on. Also, if you've ever met Chris in person, I mean, he's just the same way, just very grounded, common. Great guy.
Well, that just bodes well for the future of the Michigan district there. They've been knocking it out of the ballpark for how many years now?
Yeah, and he gave a lot of credit to Mark Gorvet, and Mark Gorvet has done a wonderful job. He's the guy we need to get on the show. He is now president up at Bethany Bible College, but really set the tone there. I know he's coming to South Carolina in January for our pastors' gathering, and so that I know that's going to be a good time.
Yeah. But it's that very quality of him attributing success to his predecessor.
Yeah.
Rather than glomming onto it for himself, that says to me, this guy really, he's living an authentic and in a life of integrity. And in terms of his relationships here on the district and his relationship to his work and ministry there, he has a healthy view of it.
Yeah,
we're all really just participants in the greatest work on earth.
He also mentioned Craig Groeschel, which would be another big fish for us to go try to catch sometime.
You would.
I tell you, I like Craig Groeschel and the work that he does.
And Craig has done a lot with actually online simulcasting.
Yes. In fact, they renamed their church lifechurch.tv. That is the name of their church.
Yeah.
And that is their web address. It's a very, very interesting work. But the book that he mentioned, fantastic book. I absolutely love that. I went through that with a small group at one point, and it was just so powerful for them to just really narrow in on what are not what are all the 112 different things that everybody else is doing, but what are we good at? How can we use what we're good at to affect our community? And it's just really great.
I know you've showed a couple of videos at church, and two things I've seen have just been solid.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. All right, well, let's turn our attention now to
Download of the Week.
Hey, there's a beautiful picture of our Download of the Week. We're talking this week about Evernote. It's been around for a while, so many of you may already know a lot about it, but good gracious, what a great tool and resource it is. Basically, Evernote is an application that stores notes. It either notes that you write, notes that you take pictures of, web pages that you're on. You can install little applets in your web browser that will send stuff off a web page to Evernote. So, for example, as I was crafting my message for last Sunday, as I found different resources, I created a notebook. The notebook was called Proverbs Wealth. That's what the topic was that I was talking about. And as I kept coming across resources or putting things together, I kept creating new notes and adding them to that notebook that then I was able to pull back from and use those things to craft what I needed after having all those resources. Just a fantastic application. One of the coolest things that I think about it and what it does is that, say you had a handwritten note or a typed out note and it's on a piece of paper, and you say, well, how can I digitize this note? How can I get it to where it needs to be? The beauty of Evernote is if you took a picture of it with, like, say, your phone and uploaded it, it analyzes that and does a fantastic job of reading. Now, if you have decent handwriting, of reading your handwriting, reading what's in print there, and then you can actually search through that. So say that you just had a bunch of different pictures of a bunch of different pages of text. You can go through and search those typed out text pictures and it'll pull all that stuff together according to the keywords that you're putting in. You can throw video files, audio files, text files, just about anything together and put them there. The other beauty of it is that they are built out across multiple platforms. So any iOS device, any Apple computer, any PC. I'm not sure about Linux. That's the one I'm not sure about. But Android, all of that. They've got clients for all of those different things that synchronize those notes and keep it there. And for if you're working on a project, if you're trying to get something done and you need to find a place to put all those, but you're having a hard time figuring that out, Evernote would be a great solution for you. What you're going to find as you start using it is just the more you continue to use it, the more powerful you realize that it is, the more little things that they have. If you're on Chrome, they have just a great Chrome app, as well as for the Chrome browser, this little, it's basically this link that it puts in your quick link bar where if you're on a web page, you can just click that and it'll send that web page to Evernote and store it there. Absolutely fantastic, but that's really all I have to say about it. Have any of you guys used this before?
I have it loaded. I just haven't utilized it. I had no idea that it could take your handwritten note if it's legible.
Yeah, if it's legible.
And search.
If it's legible. But yeah, it'll do that. And I've tested it out before. I've scratched something down on a piece of paper and taken a picture of it and sent it up there. And I mean, after a little bit of time, after it's not instantaneous because it has to get there to the server and be analyzed. But after a little bit of time, it's done. And I can find stuff based on those keywords. And I mean, I don't want to encourage the breaking of copyright rules here, but say that you're even reading a book that just had a passage or an illustration that was just really good. Instead of taking the time to type it out, you could take a picture of that passage, shoot it up there, and now it's up there digitized. You could be able to pull it down from there. It's just a great tool. So,
Steve, have you ever used Evernote?
It used to be a pay-for program, and initially I had downloaded the trial version, and it was very promising but crippled, and it didn't. Then I loaded it on my iPhone, and have promised myself that when I get time, I'm going to learn how that works.
It really, there are pay-for options. I think you get like 2 gigs of storage, kind of like Dropbox kind of deal, to where you get a certain set amount of stuff that you can have up there. And usage that you have. And if you became a very heavy user, they do have subscriptions that then build that out further. But I've been able to so far use just what's free. They also offer APIs, and it's being talked about in the chat room right there, that it's even integrated into some other different kinds of software. And in the chat room, they're talking about, I don't know how to pronounce this, but Cadre Bible, which is a Bible app for Android. That it's built into that, so that you can pull right from that and synchronize stuff with.
Cadre is also on Linux.
Okay.
So, yeah.
But very, very interesting, very handy tool. And
Steve's brushing his teeth. Wow. Yeah, I can hear it.
Can you hear it?
Don't gargle on air, okay?
That's too late.
All right, let's move on to They Said It.
And go.
Read my lips.
I'm going to say this again.
Smooth.
I've never taken steroids or
professional.
HGH.
I took the initiative in creating the internet.
The Macintosh, of all the machines I've ever seen, is the only one that meets that standard.
I'm not a crook.
If you know what you're doing here, slide out.
We will kill the priest. We will kill him, and no one will prevent it. We will cut him into pieces. A Muslim extremist who was part of a mob outside of St. George's Church in central Egypt, threatening to kill the priest, Father George Tabet. Source, ADN Chronos.
Southern Baptists repeatedly have affirmed our commitment to the full inspiration and authority of Scripture. This translation alters the meaning of hundreds of verses, most significantly by erasing gender-specific details which appear in the original language. We cannot commend the 2011 NIV to Southern Baptists or to the larger Christian community. Part of a resolution authored by Tim Overton in which the Southern Baptist Convention rejected the 2011 NIV Bible. Source, The Christian Post.
I'm not accusing Levi of date rape or rape at all, but I'm just looking back with the adult eyes I now have and just thinking, that was a foolish decision. I should have never been underage drinking, and I should have never gotten myself into a situation like that. Bristol Palin, commenting on her relationship with Levi Johnson, she says much more in her book, Not Afraid of Life, My Journey So Far. Source, ABC News.
This is going to change the field of hepatitis C dramatically. The treatment may not be easier, but it does have a higher chance of cure, and side effects are a lot more tolerable if you have them for a shorter period of time. Dr. Natalie Bzoedge, a liver disease specialist in California Pacific Medical Center, who was a lead researcher in the study documenting the effectiveness of a new drug in Civic. Well, I did that just right, didn't I?
Source, the San Francisco Chronicle.
Thank you. That's down below the fold on this. I went to the next page.
Yeah, mine as well.
Thank you.
All right. The first story is one that you put me on to, Steve, and that is, we kind of forget about Egypt now. We had this big leadership change, and it's off our radar screen, and, there's this big call for democracy, but about 10% of Egypt is Coptic Christian, and they just continue to, be under persecution and threat by, it says here, Muslim extremists.
Oh, you know what? The article revealed what precipitated this riot. You can't blame the Muslim extremists. You just can't, because obviously this was a provocation. The Christians decided that they were going to do some renovations to their church. And you can't have that in a predominantly Muslim society. Of course, I'm being facetious.
Right.
The next part of the story that interested me was that this took place across several hours of the day, and no military, no police came to surround and protect the church and the people inside. They did eventually come and walk the priest outside. What a man of courage and faith he must be, to go with such people into a mob such as that, and put him in a car and hustled him away back to what is essentially the Vatican of the Coptic Church in Minya. So I think the mask is off for those that want to pretend that predominantly Muslim countries are in any way tolerant of other religions. We don't see that one place in the world, not one country.
Yeah.
And yet you do see again and again predominantly Christian countries being tolerant. And yes, there are problems. There always will be problems as long as there are people, but there's not beheadings and the murder and mayhem that goes on there.
Well, and just such brutal comments that came out of the crowd. We will kill the priest. We will kill him, and no one will prevent us. We will cut him into pieces.
Yeah, this is one of the leaders of the mob that was saying this. I mean, this wasn't just somebody that walked up on the scene as a troublemaker and speaking out of place. This was the whole heart and sentiment of the crowd. Now, I don't believe for a moment that all Muslims feel that way. But you have to ask yourself, in a climate where they are professing to birth a new Egypt, a new democratic Egypt, well, our country, as Francis Schaeffer said so many times in his books and videos, was conceived with the idea that liberty was and justice were for all people. And though we didn't have that for the slave initially, it didn't even take us 100 years before we had seen that this was an inconsistency that could not be tolerated. It would undermine our own government and credibility in the world abroad. So we took care of it. And all along there were strong voices, leading voices. Our leaders were telling us that slavery was wrong and needed to be dealt with. We're not hearing anything like that in terms of protection of minority religions and minorities in general in the Muslim community in Egypt.
Let's hasten on to the next one here. I have to be honest, I have not even picked up a 2011 NIV, the gender, I guess they're trying to be gender neutral.
Yeah.
I really don't know much about this translation at all. You know, the Southern Baptists who take a complementarian view are, you know, very much against it because they feel like it's tearing down those distinctions. Do you know anything about this translation, Steve?
I've read excerpts.
Okay.
I would just say this about it. I am conflicted. I don't like to see anything changed in a translation, but the NIV is not strictly a translation. If you have studied the range, we go from things like the Living Bible and the Message, which are truly paraphrases that for most points throughout the text, they're trying to express the concept, the idea behind what is written in the original language. And you go over to the King James, the New American Standard, and some others that are more literally based. In other words, if it says cat in the original, it's going to say cat in English and not feline and something else. Well, I think what you have to understand is the intended audience. The world around us is shifting, and the language of gender specificity is under attack everywhere.
Well, I wonder too. I mean, to some degree, I mean, when I have preached, I have on the fly. You know, you just point out that this is meant for men and women. We're not. This isn't a statement. It's generic. And so, in some cases, I mean, you can get me easily to sign off on changing something because clearly the intent of the author was to make a generic statement, not a specific gender statement.
Yeah.
But if you go deeper and further into your Bible study, there's certain things that say, you know, now we are the sons of God, and it doth not yet appear what we shall be, but we know that when he shall appear, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. All right, sons of God. A son in the Jewish culture, and even in the Roman culture, beyond that, the broader Roman culture, the son had certain rights not inherited by the daughter. So what we would be hearing if we were listening with the understanding that was being implied in those early days is that you have full rights. You are in no way deficient. You have a full share in the kingdom of God.
Yeah.
And in this relationship with God. And so I think, you know, in my preaching, I would bring that out, that there was a difference. He doesn't just simply say children here, but sons, because it meant something to be a son in those days. But in our own time, the thought is expressed. That's exegeting the text. In our own time, we have to then turn it around and say, the idea expressed is that whether you're a man or a woman, you have full rights. That's what's being taught here.
I don't know. Well, we'll keep. I mean, I'll have more experience with it and read it more as the future unfolds here, and we'll see.
I think that probably the most discussion about this happens in the occasions where, in relation to God and the Holy Spirit, when
that's where I have a problem.
When gender neutralization happens, that's where it really becomes that, because I think that a part of, like, when in Scripture, when the Holy Spirit is given a gender specific thing, it's saying this is not an it. This is a personality. It is he. It is the Spirit's not just an abstract thing. It is a personality. Yeah. So I think that that's where the major kickback against this comes, less so than what we've been discussing, which I agree with you on that. We do need to because people may not get that, and it may seem very chauvinistic or whatever if you read Scripture or did something and didn't explain that in the culture that we live in, that yes, this applies to both men and women.
Yeah, no, you're probably right. One of the stories we covered here is Crystal Palin's book, Bristol Palin's book, Not Afraid of Life, My Journey So Far. I actually saw her interview on ABC where she talks about this. Interesting, in this book, Now, she got pregnant out of wedlock, but she takes an abstinence view, and talks about her own experience and says this, that number one, she was underage drinking. Number two, that she was using protection and still got pregnant, and therefore her anecdotal response is that, well, if you don't, there's only one way you're going to be sure, and that is abstinence. She's certainly not shying away from, controversy here. She also has some critical things to say of Levi Johnson, her son's father, which, I just don't think that serves anything. At some point, this kid's going to grow up, and he's going to be able to read Mama's book, But it's out there right now. No thoughts from the gallery, right?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, it's a sad situation. I don't know that it needed a book written about it.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. I mean, it's a money-making opportunity. I think that at the end of the day, that's probably what it boils down to. Real quick, this story about hepatitis C. This most recent treatment, 80% success rate with this treatment.
What is the treatment? I have not read this.
Don't know. I mean, the medication here is INCIVEK.
Incevic. Yeah, the guy that read that had real trouble.
Yeah, Incevic. Yeah, but 80%. I mean, guys, that is huge. That is huge. And for those of you who don't know about hepatitis C, what it does is it attacks the liver. And so, we have a friend right now, a very close friend, who has gave his life to Christ, and it wasn't until years later that he found out he had hepatitis C, and it was all due to lifestyle choices that he made when he was young and wasn't even old enough to appreciate the decisions that he was making. And so, I, for one, was just really thrilled to see this. Matter of fact, I know two people right now who have hepatitis C, and one is just beginning to start treatments, and I'm wondering if it's in Civic that they're going to put him on, because he's been struggling for a few years as well. So this is hopeful. I was encouraged to see it.
And now on to our last story, which is exciting. The title has got me curious. Go ahead.
Priest given walking papers after he agrees to being a judge for a bikini contest. As always, Steve brings us the burning stories of the day. I don't even know where you get these things, man.
Right out of the news. Man.
Yeah, there you go.
I wonder what his thought process was behind. What did he assume would happen?
Well, now, what he says in the article is this: the church challenges him on, hey, you're a priest. What are you doing over there judging us? Sleazy bikini contest, and he says, no business of yours. It was in my spare time. And that I told Tony about a pastor in a church, and I regret that it was a pastor, but this so illustrates the need for what we were talking about last week with Tom Clegg about authenticity and integrity, where we don't compartmentalize our life and say, well, this is my religious life, this is my duty to my church, but that we be authentically Christian in every area of our lives, and just leave the doors open between all of those things. Because when I was in Florida, there was a pastor who was arrested with 2 prostitutes in his car. Well, of course, this made the news, as it will, television and print. And when the District Board of Ministerial Orders and Relations came to call upon him with the district superintendent, he asked them what they were there for, and they told him, he said, that happened on my day off. Now, literally. And he thought, I'm laughing about it, but I cry about it too, because it's an indication that we have taken a profession rather than received a calling. If we can look at ourselves as ministers and not see that we're ministers in every area of life. Now, I'm not the best minister to my family. I'm trying to do better, but it's always been that when you hear a fire bell ringing out there yonder, you run to it. That's just part of our training and everything. But I can tell you this much. I intend to be and try my best to be, and to the extent I'm aware of myself, I am the same person out there, in here, wherever I may be. John Wesley said it somewhere, and I've not been able to track it down in any copy, but I read it and noted it when I was a young man, failed to note which book. He said, "It is the goal of the Christian to be at all times what he is some of the times."
Yeah, and what you have here is a guy who just segmented his life.
Yeah.
Yeah. You talk about authenticity. It makes me think last week on the Technology Show Facebook account, Devin Rose, we were talking about authenticity, and he wrote, "So, would authenticity include being honest on our Wesleyan annual service reports?" I wonder what he meant. Yeah.
There's always a troublemaker.
Yeah, there's many ways we can go with that.
Well, your reply should have been, "Art thou he that troubleth Israel?"
Yeah. Hey, before we go to what's coming up next, did you want to say something about the live stream available?
Yeah. Just as a reminder, you can watch our show now on any iOS, Android, Windows Phone, Boxy, Google TV, anywhere where there is a Ustream app. You can watch us live as it's going on. You can even join the chat room right from your iOS device. Also, our chat room, we have a IRC channel as a part of this. Like, if you get aggravated because our chat kind of jumps around when people talk and you keep having to scroll down, which isn't something that we can change. That's just the nature of the chat room that Ustream has. Well, if you have an IRC client, you can jump in the chat room there and interact with the show that way as it's going on. So be sure to check that out. If you go to thetechnologyshow.com/live, the instructions for joining the IRC chat room is posted up at the top. And there's a link there that just says, here's instructions on how to do this, and it walks you through how to get all that set up. So please pay attention to those things.
All right, next week we have Greg Edmonds in studio, going to talk to us about the work that's going on in Haiti. I know you're excited
love
about
him.
that.
I'm excited. I haven't seen Greg since I got back in early February, and I'm looking forward to it.
All right, July 27th we have Dr. Steve Deneff and Dr. David Drury. They'll be talking to us about their book, Soul Shift. August the 3rd, we'll follow that up with Dr. Bob Weitzel and his book, Waypoints. August the 10th, we have Matthew DePrez, and he'll be talking to us about intergenerational ministries. And then now back on our schedule for August the 31st is Dr. Bob Cranston. He's a medical doctor. He's part of the Free Methodist Church. He has written a book, Bioethics and Today's Christian. And he will also be joined by Paige Cunningham, who's the director for the Center for Bioethics. And so that is going to be a great show. Really looking forward to that. So got some great stuff coming up. Make sure and get those on the calendar. We'd love to have you in the chat room for those. We know it's going to be great conversation. All right, Steve, where can our listeners find you online?
Well, they can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/Steve.Stanley. And I just want to say, before anybody tries to friend me there, I'd be honored to take anybody as a friend, but I post all kinds of junk on my page. So if you're waiting
like
for
Steve
great,
said, he's the same.
That's exactly right.
Even on Facebook.
If I like a love song, I'll post it there. If I get nostalgic for an old 60s rock and roll, I'll put that up there. So get ready for it.
All right, Matthew.
You can find me at matthewtg.com.
All right, and you can find Heath in Wisconsin if you're looking for him right now. Find me at facebook.com/AKC64. If you want to do further research on anything we discussed today, you can find all the links to the stories we covered at our website, thetechnologyshow.com. If you want to contact us, please do that by sending emails to thetechnologyshow@gmail.com, or even better yet, call us at 3049-TEOLOGY. That's 304-986-5649. Leave us a message. We may even play your comments on the air. Thank you once again for joining us. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
We're going to, now that we've done that, we're going to play us out with the Soul Shift movie.
Do it.
But before that's done, we've got an individual in the chat room who I want you guys to know made contact with Tom Clegg after our show, said, hey, I enjoyed that episode, all that. Ended up having a lunch meeting with him to further some discussion on stuff.
Cool.
So I definitely think we need a voicemail about that.
We do, man.
We kind of, we made the connection, the love connection.
Love connection.
All right, here we go. Soul Shift video. Ta-da.
Hey, tell me something.
Oh, okay. Well, hold on. Let me stop the Soul Shift video so I can tell you something. Yes.
Oh,
Go.
I can't see it, so
Yes.
I'm sorry. I can't see it or hear it.
Yeah, okay.
What did you? I thought we were talking privately here.
Oh, no, we are
We're
not.
still on air there,
we are
Steve.
still on
Wait till
air.
after the video, Steve.
Yeah, well, or call us, FaceTime Tony on his phone, all right? All right, here we go. Soul Shift. Here we go. Doo-doo.
This is not about becoming a nicer person. It's not just about me disciplining myself to be a more other-centered person. It's allowing the Holy Spirit of God to do that in me.
This God who is transcendent and allows us to call him Daddy, loves me like that.
That realization gave me the freedom to begin living as a child.
It's not ours. Any money or possessions or whatever it may be, we are to be a manager of them, not an owner of them.
There was a very real just a moment before we walked out of that hospital that I am either going to believe God is who he says he is, or I'm gonna walk away.
The more we listen for God's voice, the more he gives it to us.
I had such a mindset of needing to initiate with God, but God wants me to just sit and receive from him too.
Submitting to a shepherd gives you that resource and person to lean on and to cry on their shoulder and to turn to for guidance.
This is what it's all about. Reaching out to others, doing for others.
Just changing that way of thinking, not just what can I get from them, but what can I give.
I've walked with God most of my life, but I look back and I'm like, oh, I was missing out. I didn't really know him.
This is what David meant. This is what it means to have your soul restored.
It allows you to be someone who loves for the sake of and for the purpose of the other person. And I think that's the kind of love that we're asked to have as Christians.